So hello everyone, it's 1 p.m. Central, and we would like to welcome you in another webinar that is hosted by by Team Belkasoft RigER out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. We're inviting everyone and happy to see everyone joining us today. So today's topic is very interesting, not only because it is unique compared to what we have been talking about before, but it is also timely and relevant across different sections of our lives. So it doesn't only necessarily apply to what we do at work, but also what we do at home, especially in this interconnected world where we are now working from home a lot. So today's topic is cybersecurity for oil field. So today's agenda is presented on this slide, and presenter today is Arsene Artnan, the Chief Information Security Officer here at Belkasoft RigER. So we'll cover a number of different topics in depth. So please do make sure that you have either lunch and a coffee just by your side to make sure that you are not distracting yourself from very important pieces of information we're going to be talking today. So we'll talk about the cybersecurity in general, as well as lay out a number of different aspects of what we need to pay attention to when we deal with the cybersecurity in the oil field specifically, and how RigER might be of help to you. So without further ado, let's get started. So Arsene, take it away.
Thank you, Nikolai. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So, yes, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity today, and in general, try to answer a few questions that most people will have, and just talk about a little bit more on the effect that the cybersecurity has on today's oil field and oil and gas industry. So what is cybersecurity? Common threats, access control, passwords, best practices. These are something that we're going to discuss in today's webinar. So let's go ahead and understand what actually cybersecurity is. So as defined by Wikipedia, the cybersecurity or information technology security is the protection of computer systems, networks from the theft of or damage to their hardware, software, or electronic data, as well as from the disruption or misdirection of the services they provide. Now, what does this mean? And to understand this, we actually need to, first of all, understand how the digital world works. So first of all, the digital form of any type of information is going to be a certain type of a file. Now, be it a piece of paper that you had some information on, be it a picture, video, audio, etc., any kind of information, if it is digitalized, is going to be considered as a certain type of a file. Now, obviously, that files are going to be needed, are going to need a place to be stored. So all digital information is going to be stored somewhere. It's going to be either your local hard drive, your USB flash drives, it's going to be network servers, it's going to be clouds and data centers, but every single file will need to be stored somewhere. Now, obviously, having those files stored somewhere and just not being able to share those files or to open from somewhere else is not going to work. So we're going to need a network. And the network in basic terms is going to be the connection between two or more computing units. Now, computing units is way broader term than the computer itself, because your mobile phone, your laptop, your computer, your smartwatch, every single technology in today's world can be considered as a computing unit, starting from obviously the computers and ending from the POS terminals, point of service terminals. So every single piece of that equipment is going to be attached to a network to be able to communicate to other equipment and to transfer information. Now, information exchange occurs obviously through networks, and that is called data transmission. That is how your files that you send from your computer, your emails, end up in someone else's mailbox. That's how you type in the address in your web browser, and your web browser understands that it needs to go to google.com or somewhere else. That's a form of transferring information from your local point to the actual server point. Now, as in real world, let's imagine that you are writing a mail to someone, and you are going to send that mail. Now you put that mail in your mailbox, and that obviously that mail does not miraculously end up on the other end. Your mailbox is going to be opened by the postman. He's going to pick it up. He's going to take it to the sorting facility. Then they're going to be putting into some form of transportation and delivering it to the end destination. That's the exact case in the digital world. Now, your single file transmission is going to encounter multiple devices on its way to the addressee. Now, those multiple devices can be considered and are called actually in digital world as hops, like the grasshopper hops from one point to the other. And those hops are going to be started on your end, will pass through your gateway or modem, will transmit through several devices on the internet, and will end up at the addressee's mailbox or whatever software he's using or she's using. So there are a lot of points between you and the addressee that will need to be considered. And as in the real world, obviously, there are going to be different type of threats that will actually be able to compromise the valuable information. So those threats can start at your endpoint. For example, your computer can be infected, or can be in the middle. The hackers can spoof information or just compromise some other device that your information is passing through, or at the endpoint, the addressee's computer or the device. So we are going to need to protect that information in every possible way that we can. Excuse me. So let's talk difference. Let's talk difference about what is information security versus the cybersecurity. Now, information in all its form, in non-digital form, is can be considered all kind of paperwork. For example, in the corporate world, it can be contractual, legal, HR records, pictures, and so on. The audio-video recordings on tapes, on films, the verbal communication between you and someone else, or you here, the visual communication, etc. All those and a lot more are types of non-digital information. Now, on the other side, we have the digital, and those digital, examples can be considered as digital information. For example, every single electronically stored file on computers, on servers, in the cloud data centers, etc. Every single digital piece of information that is transmitted through a digitalized network, local network. And I mentioned digitalized because we had analog phones, and those are again networks, and the electrical lines are also networks. So digital network and all kinds of other information, any kind of information that can be held on a computer, transmitted through a network, or operated electronically is going to be considered as a digital information. Now, information security is a very broad term, and it applies to securing any type of information. You can secure your information by having a piece of paper in a locked cabinet, or having a facility security, etc., etc. You get the idea. And the cybersecurity is just a part, a significant, but still just a part of the information security. So the cybersecurity will apply to all the security measures that will need to be in place to protect your digital information. Now, let's talk a bit about the global information security market. So, from the year 2018 to the year 2022, the global information security market is estimated to grow about 9% and to reach a staggering $170 billion. Now, the current figure as of 2020 is $152.2 billion worth of global information security market. And in that market, obviously, the threats are significant and the breaches are also significant due to those threats. So we can see in the left side of the screen the growth of the security breaches, and you can consider it exponential because we've seen a 67% growth just over a 3-year period, and from the 2018 to 2020, we have already seen 11% of growth in security breaches. This is the recorded statistics. I would like to point out that about 40 to 50% of all information security breaches have not been reported. So we are talking about just the numbers that have been reported to corresponding bodies, and we have those numbered statistics. So let's talk a bit about actual statistics, information security statistics. Now, just in the first half of 2019, the data breaches exposed 4.1 billions of information records. That is just in 6 months. The 75% of those, 71% of those breaches were financially motivated. The hacker or the intruder or whatever that person was had a financial interest and was trying to gain some cash from it. The 25% of those breaches were motivated by espionage. Those can be corporate espionage and some other types. And just a single shy 4% can be allocated to all other types of breaches. For example, just a script kiddie is having fun and trying to crack someone's computer. So the 43% of small businesses have fallen victims to those breaches. Now that's a significant number, and the only way this number is going to move is upwards. This is going to grow in every possible way because the digital world is getting more diverse. The digital world is growing, and obviously the threats are going to grow, and the hackers and the temptation to have information, to have control over that information is going to grow. So as of right now, we have 43% of small businesses that have been victims of breaches. So 34% of those data breaches were caused by insider threats or internal actors or people who are inside of a company as employees, as ex-staff, as someone who has access to corporate information, computers, networks, etc. The 67% of today's business leaders, they feel increasing cyber risk and they feel the need to employ at least a decent cybersecurity measure set. So that's a number to consider. And let's just do simple math. Now, 39 seconds. This is all it takes to have a single hack. So during a day, on average, we are going to experience 2,244 hacks worldwide. So every 39 seconds, a hack is happening. Now, just from phishing attacks, every single minute we lose statistically $17,700. And phishing attacks are, in English, just using simple words, the emails that you might receive with a scam asking you to open a file or to follow a link. So phishing attacks, $17,000 every single minute. Now, funny figure, but we are going to experience, not we, the victims, about 60 to 65 victims worldwide are going to experience a $1 million worth of information loss during our webinar. So again, another scary figure, but let's go through more statistics. So how are actually malicious files delivered to you? 48% of malicious 48% of malicious emails are attachments and are attached to Office files. Now, 53% of companies, this is a 2019 year figure, 53% of companies had over 1,000 sensitive files open to every single employee, which is a disaster. You have to control the access of your employees and have only those who are actually intended can have access to the information, have access to appropriate information. Now, 56% of Americans have no idea how to deal with the data breach. Have no idea what steps to take, don't know how to do it, and most of them will not even understand that their data has been breached or compromised. 81% of computers that are compromised by at least one successful attack. So let's imagine a hacker is sitting in his room. He just tries once, and 81% of computers that he can try are going to be compromised by his just single try. 94% of all malware, viruses, trojans, ransomware, etc., are going to be delivered by email. And this number is, again, growing number. This statistics has shown an exponential growth through the last 5 to 10 years. So email being the most common communication method in this digital era is going to be the most used path to deliver malware to you or their addressees. So how does actually the cybersecurity apply to energy industry? 56% of American energy companies have faced a cybersecurity incident in 2019. And these incidents, again, were motivated by either financial gains or corporate espionage. Information is increasingly becoming the most valuable asset that one can possess. Obviously, the hunt after the information and corporate information and private information is showing an exponential growth. So 31% of energy companies believe they are ready to face cyber threats. Now, I would like to point out that being ready and believing that they are ready are two completely different things. This means that 31% of companies have some type of cybersecurity measures in place, and they are ahead in the game. They are at least trying to secure their corporate information, their private information, their client information, and they are doing the necessary steps. So this number also will show growth in the future, and most companies in the energy industry will obviously tend to go over the path that will secure their information, digital information, in the cyber world. 30% of incidents in the energy industry involved some form of phishing attack as their vector in 2017. Now this number has doubled, almost doubled by 2019. Phishing is the most common form because it relies on the human factor. We'll talk about the human factor and other threats in a few moments, but just a glance. The human factor is the most exploitable factor in the cybersecurity world. Only 0.2% of energy companies invest only 0.2% of their revenue in cybersecurity. Now, this does not mean that it is just that cheap to invest in cybersecurity. It means that in today's energy industry, the companies are not as digitalized as in other sectors. Now, this number is going to grow significantly as the actual players understand, the big players understand that the cybersecurity is the highest priority, is becoming the highest priority, and this number will increase. So investing in cybersecurity is going to grow again exponentially, but in today's reality, it is much cheaper that it can cost you in, let's say, in 5 years or in 3 years even. So it's a wise time to make a decision and understand if you need a cybersecurity measure in place. So oilfield cybersecurity, as again discussed, the more digitalized you get, your company gets, the more diversified those that digitalization becomes, the more diversified your cybersecurity will need to be. For example, you're going to need to use multiple types of software, from, let's say, asset management, from simple Word, Excel, to operations management software, accounting software, ERP, and some other software that might be of use to your current situation in your company. Those software pieces will require, in most cases, integrations between each other to just streamline the data exchange and simplify life, obviously. And your data is going to be stored either locally on your computers, on the employee computer, on premise, which means that you will need to have a corporate server or servers in place, or in cloud, in data centers that are governed by third parties who will partially guarantee your information security. partially, because there is no way the third party can guarantee your information security in total. So, excuse me. So, oilfield service companies will tend to be pushed to the direction to employ international standards, or at least be compliant to the highest international standards of the cybersecurity world. Those being like ISO 27000 family, the SOC Type 1, Type 2, and other standards. And obviously today we are governed, our digital world is governed by multiple laws, federal laws, which can be the privacy laws in the United States, the Personal Information Protection Electronic Distribution Act in Canada, and GDPR in Europe. So these frameworks govern and dictate how the cybersecurity should work, what needs to be protected, what can be protected at a certain level, and so on. So the big companies, the big production companies, and all the big players in the game will see increasing desire to employ only companies, service companies that comply, at least comply to those standards and follow those guidelines provided by those privacy laws, PIPEDA and GDPR. So it is a process. The market is going to be growing. The digitalization in the oil field has moved from the initial stages to a more growing pattern. So we are going to see the increasing trend to employ these standards and the compliance to these standards in your company if you want to survive in the current market of the oil and gas industry. It is time to build your cybersecurity foundation. Why we say it now? Because as I just mentioned, oilfield has just started to go digital in the past few years, and now we are moving from the initial steps to the actual, I would call it, professional steps in the cybersecurity world, which will be applying to most big companies in the game. And there is no better time for the small service companies to start to adopt cybersecurity, because it's going to be more cost effective. It's going to take way more less time than in 5 years, because the demands will increase. The companies that will demand for cybersecurity will have more points to include in those demands, and it's going to be harder to implement your cybersecurity later. So the sooner you start, the better for you, the more cost effective it's going to be. So let's move on from the statistics to the actual common threats and see what the common threats actually look like. We'll start to talk about the malware, actual malware, viruses, worms, trojans, ransomware, etc., etc., etc. There are so many types of those malicious codes that can be can infect and can be injected into your personal device that we can't even count them as of right now. So simply put, these are all types of malicious code that will somehow affect the performance of your computer. It will be injected into your computer without your knowledge. You will not know about the existence of it unless you have a proper antivirus or firewall software installed. And these types of malware tend to sometimes self-replicate, like the worms and viruses. They can open backdoors like the Trojans and allow external access to your computer, to your device, to your servers and networks, etc. They can sometimes even damage and lock the access to your information, which is ransomware, and it's I would say, the latest biggest threat in the world for the past few years. And it has a lot of implication on the financial side also. It locks your information and it asks for money. And unless you pay that money, your information is destroyed. And there is no guarantee actually that if you pay the money, you will receive your information back. So that's another major threat to consider and to understand how to protect yourself from it. Another type of threats, which is heavily relying on the human factor, phishing, scams, all the types of social engineering, etc., etc. These all rely on the human factor and gain to exploit the vulnerabilities of the human nature. Just for example, in the recent years, in the recent months, due to the pandemic, we had seen a growth in emails that somehow relate to the subject of the pandemic. And for this example, I've pulled off this from the internet. The CDC Health Alert Network sends an email asking to do something, and it shows a link in the parentheses. Now, it looks like a link perfectly, but if you look closely and if you hover your mouse over that link, you will see actual link at the bottom of your browser to which it points to. So it is just a text formatted as a link, and it points to completely another source, which will most probably infect your computer with some form of malware or virus. So it is something that you need to be cautious about and to pay extra attention when you receive emails from unknown sources or even from known sources asking you to do something that wouldn't be actually considered normal. So pay attention to all your emails and all your communication. Just a simple real world example. Invoices encounter 15.9% of all the phishing attacks. They're number one disguise for the distribution of malware through the phishing attacks. And if you or someone else or your client sees the subject of an email as a bill or invoice, it automatically tends to be opened. So another thing to consider, the exploitation process of the human nature heavily relies on belief. So if you do not believe and you tend to check twice at least, then you have a way more chance to be secure than you would be actually in a place where you just open up the emails and open all the attachments that you get. Let's talk about human factor. I would say the most significant threat in the digital world, the weakest link in the chain. Again, we humans we tend to trust. We tend to believe, we want to be understood, we want to be in the social environment, and that implies a lot of things. So if we tend to trust, we are easily deceived. We might not be well educated on the matters or trained on the security awareness and end up in a place that we just do certain actions that actually compromise our own or corporate information. Some of us will practice negligence. Some would just not care about anything and just open up any email, any attachment, etc. Some will knowingly ignore because it's not their business, it's not my job, so why would I care? Some will actually exploit their access level and abuse the systems. This is more harmful category of human beings that will actually do the exploitation and use the system on their own benefit, for their own benefit. Let's say, for example, I know it's not a common example, but for example, you have a server and someone in the IT team, a junior IT something, has a full access to that server. And that server is a powerhouse. So he needs to do some research in his university degree. So he uses that server, the power of that server, to do the computing for his personal gain. I mean, the cause is, the reason he's doing that is not that bad, obviously, but your company loses server time, meaning the time and the resources spent on the service provision to your clients is now divided between the service provision to the clients and the time it takes to fulfill the job that has been given to the server by that particular employee. So he exploits his own access level and abuses the system, and you end up in a place where you have somehow compromised information and somehow abused information. And I would say the most harmful category would be the insider threat. These are people who would be either working for you now, or they can be ex-staff. They can be unsatisfied employees, just for many reasons. Responsible ones for the corporate espionage, etc. Those are the people who are considered insider threats. And in the year 2018, the companies suffered insider threats. The number of companies that suffered insider threats was 34% of the overall companies who had actually passed these statistics. So insider threats is not a joke, it's a real threat, and there are a lot much more threats in the digital world than the human factors, than the phishing scams, social engineering, and the viruses, etc. So we all need to actually be aware of the security measures that can be in place, and we will need to understand how to deal with those, either deal or ask someone who is competent enough to deal with those. Now, let's talk about corporate cybersecurity culture. What this means. If you are a corporation, if you are a company that is on its way to digitalization, and you understand that you need some security measures in place, you will employ cybersecurity measures and try to secure all your digital information, the actual employing of measures is not going to be enough. So there are very, very long list of steps that you will need to take, but in most sense, those can be grouped into three main categories. First of all, the management needs to commit. It means that the management needs to evaluate the current situation, where you stand, where is your company's computer security right now, how do you can relate to the competition, what do they have, where do you stand actually, evaluate all your current situation, then plan ahead, plan the next steps that you will need to take. Either you have a genius IT employee who might be able to do everything, or you would need to hire someone to do anything for you, or you have an IT staff, but you will require consulting on the matters. Just plan your next step. Then move to the implementation of those measures. You implement those measures and keep them in place and oversee how it works. Now, the next step in the chain after implementing is going to be increasing the security awareness inside your company. Establishing a corporate cyber security culture involves increasing security awareness. All your all your employees need to be aware of the current threats that exist, need to be aware of the steps that can be taken to prevent those threats from happening, and need to be aware how to deal with all the actual process when the threat has already happened, the incident is in place, and we need to deal with it. So you need to define some principles that will apply to your company. You need to, first of all, educate your staff, your competent staff on the matters, and all your staff on the actual awareness. And you will need to train constantly and retrain them on the security factors of the cyber world. You need to raise the awareness periodically, and again, do the retraining factor, like once every 6 months or once a year, depending on your operations and your digitalization level. Your employees should practice your culture, meaning they should understand how everything works, and they should not just do it just for doing it. They should be thinking the same way you are. At least that's the desirable outcome. Now, employee needs to be also committed. Not only the management, but the employee also needs to be committed. It means that they will need to follow the guidelines that you have in place. You might employ a information security policy, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And those policies, those procedures will need to be followed by every single employee. They need to understand how it works. They need to understand how your processes work, and they will need to avoid being the weakest link in the chain. You need to stress test and constantly review your processes and understand where your weakest links are. You will need to also review the performance and understand where your levels are at and whether you can improve. And if there are obvious changes, you will need to employ them. So let's talk about the information security policy. What is it? It's a general high-level piece of document that will define all the processes that you have in your company information-wise. It will allow you to define procedures and guidelines that will govern those processes and streamline everything. So to establish an information security policy, you will need to, first of all, define your guidelines, understand what you need to do. You will also need to understand your boundaries. Where do your responsibilities end as a company? What do you want to secure? What do you want to cover by those information security policies, and what can be out of those boundaries? You need to also heavily assess and identify the risks that you have currently and to address those. Now, this does not necessarily mean only cybersecurity risks, because your information, your digital infrastructure can govern not only your digital information, but also your processes, which obviously are not only digital. So you will also need to understand the connection between the digital risks, other business risks, and try to address those accordingly. And last of all, you need to document your processes. You need to define procedures on how the processes are governed, and you need to define the information security policy or policies depending on the size of your company. And that policy will govern all the information security procedures and processes. Now, on the right hand, you see the CIA triad. The CIA triad is comprised of the three main actual factors, and it's a model to design your information security policy. It's a widely used, very widely used information model, and it's also used in the international standards like ISO 27K family and the SOC family of certifications. So what it's comprised of is your information security heavily relies on three main pillars: confidentiality of your information, integrity, and availability. Now, confidentiality means that you will need to classify your information. Whether your information is going to be for public use, whether your information is going to be confidential, whether it can be restricted access, etc., it will need to be outlined in your information security policy. And the access to those has also been does also need to be governed by that policy. The integrity of information is that you will be able to have backups. You will need to have those information files or whatever it is consistent in place and have always access to that. And the availability obviously mean that you can provide access to the information that is needed by a certain group of individuals, employing the confidentiality and integrity principles already. So if you build your information security policy based on the CIA triad, there is nothing you can lose. The only thing is that you can have process. So when in place, your information security will allow you to streamline all your business processes, not only digital. It will allow you to streamline all your business processes. And in today's world, in 5 years, we're going to be more digitalized than we are now, and the growth is going to be very high. So the more we get digitalized, the more processes are getting involved in the digitalization. So your company at the end of the day will end up to be heavily digitalized. So your information security policy will allow you to streamline all your processes, have a clear path of reducing the and mitigating risk. If you cannot mitigate, you can also define the paths to either avoid or to deal with the risks that you have right now. You will have full control over your information. Well, this is kind of an abstract and ambiguous statement, but because you will never have full control of any information. No one will ever. But in the sense that you will be able to protect that information, you will be having backups, you will be having access control, etc., etc. It will allow you to have the highest level of the control over your information. And I do say that there is no way that we can have 100% control over any information, is because the information is kind of a thing that tempts hackers to possess, or other individuals to possess, and there will always be someone who is more smarter and who has a better understanding of the technologies in place to break it and take it. And if you have an information security policy, if you have your processes outlined, the procedures that govern those processes in place, you will have a precise understanding of where you stand. And this means you will also spend less time on evaluating your state within the competition, and understand to actually where to go and focus on the future. So this is also very important. Now let's talk a bit about more practical things about access control to information and actually the passwords. So access control, why is it crucial? So first of all, let's talk about the very, very basic levels of the access control. Now, this is what every single system would have. Well, most of them. And this is what you can consider to be seen by most of the users. I'm talking about the basic levels of access. So there are currently 4 very basic levels of access. No access, obviously. Read-only access, that the person who is accessing that piece of information, for example, a Word document, he is only able to open it and see it. No changes, no deletion, no something else. Limited access, when the opener can actually do some changes, save some changes, but cannot delete or create another file. And full access, obviously the highest level, can do anything basically. The common user types, just very basic, again, regular users and privileged users. Regular users would be the ones who would actually have strict governance upon their access, and the privileged ones would be the ones who have either full access or full access within their domain. Now, privileged users can be administrators, they can be limited administrators of some systems, etc., etc. But the regular users have only the set of permissions that allow them to have access to certain aspects of the actual system. Now, how do you define user access? First of all, you will need to obviously set some permissions. So the basic levels that we just talked about are governed by those permissions. The set of permissions you are setting, then you can set user roles and assign those users to certain groups. As additional, you can also employ additional functions. Now, this is not something every single piece of software has. This is something that will be employed in some software, some programs, and it will allow you to assign functions, specific functions, regardless of the user role, to a specific user. So you can just extend the functionality they have just by assigning that single function to that user. The very important principle, use the least privilege principle. This means when you are setting up your user access controls, just give access to the users at a level that is needed to perform and fulfill their responsibilities, no more. If you give more access, that opens an automatic breach. It's vulnerability, it can be breached, and if it can, it most likely will be. So exercising the least privilege principle is a very effective process to govern your user access levels. and employ additional measures for bring your own device category. Now, corporate devices are obviously going to be set up by your IT personnel. Your sysadmins, your IT guys are going to know how to deal with the actual system, what to govern, how to restrict access to some stuff, etc. But when you have an employee who has his own device, mobile phones, laptops, etc., I mean, it's not that unusual in today's reality, their own device, will need to exercise some extra caution. You will need to define some steps in your corporate information security policy and procedures, meaning you will need to have those devices assessed by your IT personnel. You will need to restrict some software to be installed on those devices, etc. And you will need those employees who have their own devices to strictly follow those guidelines and rules. So user access control is another crucial aspect of protection in the cybersecurity world. And as long as you have a strong user access control, you have a strong system. So let's move on another aspect of the access control, which is actually the passwords. Now, you can see on your screen how ridiculously small amount of time it would take to crack something as ABCDEFG if you set that as your password. Now, obviously, this is an abstract figure because how fast the password would be cracked depends on the actual device that the cracking program is running on. So if you are running on a high-end computer, it might take 29 milliseconds or even less. If you are running on a supercomputer or a highly configured server, it will take drastically less. And the 4 months for 10 characters to be cracked will be reduced to maybe 1 hour. So it depends on the device. The brute force attacks are not very common today. They have become very uncommon due to the fact that the awareness of users to use strong password is growing, and the phishing attacks is going to be replacing the brute force attacks. Instead of just trying to break something, you can actually steal it. So cracking the password is not that common, but it is still common. It is heavily used, and it will be attempted at least once per hour in the world. So that's a figure to keep in mind. It's going to be reducing in the number, but it's not going anywhere in the near future. So how to actually strengthen your password, how to create a password that is either uncrackable, and again, another abstract term, or is very strong and no one would actually desire to try to crack that password. Well, there are widely employed general guidelines that you can actually exercise. Use at least 8 characters in your password. If you use 16 characters, the probability of your password being cracked is very close to impossible. So use at least 8 characters. Use uppercase and lowercase letters in a mix. Characters, symbols, like you can see on a screen or any other that you can actually find. Use passphrases or sentences or combinations of words that will allow you to easily remember your password by employing the above rules that we have just talked about. And the very important last thing that you can do is to frequently change your passwords. 180 days in 6 months or 90 days. 90 days is a decent practice. And if you tend to have the habit of changing your password every 90 days with the above mentioned rules and guidelines, you are very, very secure. You can consider yourself very secure. What not to do? Do not tell anyone your password, obviously. Do not keep it in a written, do not keep it written on a piece of paper, lying on a desk or attached to a board or something else. Do not reuse your old password for your same account, for at all for any of your accounts. I mean, this is a very common path that some user gets hacked, and after being remediated from that hack, he uses or she uses the same password and gets hacked again. So try not to use your old passwords, just regenerate them. Do not use the same passwords for the multiple personal accounts, and do not use the same passwords for personal and corporate accounts. Now, multiple is one thing, having multiple and corporate, personal is one thing, but corporate and personal are two completely different things. Now, if your personal account is compromised, your corporate account can be automatically as well compromised if you use the same password, and vice versa. So secure yourself, use a distinct password for every account you have, or if you have a trouble remembering, use password management software or just passphrases as we have just discussed. Having a secure password will be one of the main pillars that you can actually secure yourself and your information. So try to use good passwords and change them frequently. So what we offer in RigER in terms of cybersecurity, access control, passwords, etc. Let's dive into the access control. So we've got, first of all, user groups. Certain user access levels that are grouped together, those being the administrative group, sales, operations, purchases, accounting, HR, and safety roles groups. So you can see on your screen what they do. I'm not going to dive into it in detail because we've had the same slide in our previous webinar. You can just go and check it out. And these are our actual user roles. We have 14 roles in place that will allow to strictly govern the access of the users to our RigER platform. From the administrator to salesperson to field technician to the HR manager, they all will have their specific set of permissions inside their role that will allow to strictly limit the actual actions that they can perform in the database. Aside from the roles and the groups, what we have is the functions matrix. We have additional functions that I have just been talking about a few minutes ago. And the functions will allow you to assign a specific function to a user regardless of his roles to be able to perform a specific action in the system. For example, to create and manage pricing in RigER platform. Now, how do we set up a new user? We just create a new user with its all relevant information. Then we move on to the permissions tab and we set up the permissions and the roles. Now, we do not actually give the access to actual permissions to set, but we have the access to the user roles. So you can select the user roles and the permissions would be set automatically for your users. So you can select multiple user roles, and those roles will give the actions required for that particular employee to be able to perform his duties and responsibilities. Now, what we can also offer aside from the passwords, now we have some measures already in place. So we have at least 8 characters long passwords that you will need to create and the system will not allow you to proceed unless you create the 8 characters limited password, etc. So what we can offer, we can actually increase the length of the password. We can make it to 16 to 24, how many ever you may desire. We can also set a password change interval that will force your users of the RigER platform to change their password every X days. Now, 90 days again is a good practice, but it's up to you to decide how frequently you need those password changed. We can also complexity to be forcing the user to use alphanumeric, meaning letters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase letters, and special characters in their password with the above mentioned rules. So pretty much this covers all the strength that you might need, and it's up to you to decide how do you want to employ it. Version of data from a readable format into an encoded format that can only be read or processed after it has been decrypted. So you encrypt, no one else can read that file without having the keys to decryption. That's the simple term. Now, all of our client to server to client data transmission occurs through the internet, obviously, and to the cloud. So we are utilizing the SSL and TLS encryption protocols. SSL standing for Secure Socket Layer and TLS standing for Transport Layer Security. Those are two internationally recognized and widely, heavily used encryption standards in the web traffic. Now, there are additional encryption methods that we can actually propose and we can employ for your database, but that's a point of discussion, and you can request from us information about it, and we can sit down and discuss what you need and how we can protect your protect more your information. So, international standards. Now, I have mentioned a couple of times during this webinar the international standards and the legislation that more and more bigger companies tend to comply to. So what we have in place, the most two common, the most two widely used, and the highest recognized two standards. The ISO 27000 family of standards, 27001 being the actual ISMS, Information Security Management Systems. Now, we are compliant. We will very, very soon be certified. And by very, very soon, I mean in just a matter of a couple of weeks. We are also, our data centers are also compliant to SOC 2 standard. And for the information world people, this means that we have, our data centers have the all the necessary procedures and measures in place to guarantee confidentiality, privacy, security, availability, and processing integrity. Now, SOC 2 certification, especially Type 2 report, is not a joke. So the ISO certification is not a joke. Those are lengthy implementation processes. Those are highly demanding security standards that you will need to understand and implement in your organization before you can actually start to say that you are compliant. Aside the standards, we strictly follow the privacy laws of the United States, the Canadian Personal Information Protection Act and PIPEDA, and the GDPR of the European Union. So all the major legislation that is in place that governs the information security world as of today, we are strictly following them, and we are strictly looking into changes and update our internal procedures accordingly. And the let's get to the best practices, what we can offer, what we would consider as best practices for yourself, for your organization, if you are in the process of getting digitalized and require a cybersecurity. So first of all, understand what level of security you need and what you have now. So what is your level of digitalization? How much do you consider your growth potential in the next 3 to 5 years? Who do you want to compete with? From whom do you want to expect proposals for jobs? So understand where you are standing right now. This will define the level of your digitalization and will also define the level of the cybersecurity that you need. Next step, obviously, you will need to plan what to do. We've talked about it a few minutes ago. You will need to also develop an information security policy and procedures to streamline everything with all the processes that you have in place. Maybe add some new processes, maybe change some processes that are currently in place. You will also need to obviously establish the corporate cybersecurity culture that we have discussed and assign dedicated personnel to administer your IT systems and RigER, obviously. You will need to have at least one tech guy, at least one IT guy who will understand the computers, who will think computers, and who will think data transmission, information, etc., and know how to deal with the actual incidents that if those come up. So assign dedicated personnel. Trust me, this will save you a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of hassle in the future. Educate your staff, the overall company staff, and constantly train to have up-to-date security awareness. You will need to have internal courses, or you will need to invite someone to educate your staff, to train your staff on the security awareness measures. But having security aware personnel reduces your risk of being compromised drastically. So have your staff properly educated, properly trained, and following your corporate cybersecurity culture. Mind your staff access level, and this means, again, employing the least privilege principle. Assign access to them according to their needed responsibility level. So no more, just control that access, implement a good access control, and you will save a lot of headache in the future. Obviously, use strong passwords. And use secure software and secure network connections. Whenever you install a new software in your company, for any staff member, have that software approved by your IT department or your IT guy. Now that is very important because he will understand how to avoid future disaster if that software can be considered as vulnerable. And secure network connections. Whenever you connect to the internet, use the websites with the HTTPS notation in the address. So the S in the HTTPS stands for secure. It employs either the secure socket layer, SSL, or the transmission layer security technologies that we have just talked about in the encryption slide. So SSL, TLS, are secure network connections. And if you are not in a place where you can use a VPN or corporate internal network, just use secure network connections to guarantee you some peace of mind. Now, discussing everything that we had, the last thing to say is that we can really help you if you are in a process of getting digitalized and would like to employ cybersecurity measures in your organization. We do understand how it all works because we've walked the path. We have walked the path of implementing the ISO 27000 family of standards alongside with the ISO 9000, which is the quality management systems. And we know what it takes to make your digital infrastructure secure. We can assess where you stand. We can also pinpoint the weak links in your current situation and understand how to deal with those. And we can show you how to proceed and help to be compliant if you would like to be compliant to the international standards and the international legislation. So just a call to action. If you need help, just let us know. We can help you.
On that note, I wanted to thank you very much, Arsen, for a very detailed and useful topic for our personal lives and business lives. It was a grim picture though. I wanted to highlight that it's just like life is dangerous, but it's the fact the way it is, it is. But we're here to help. That's the one big message. So if you want to book a demo with us and see how we might be able to help you from the cybersecurity or run your business perfectly and be at the same time cyber secure, that's one thing we can do for you as well. Schedule a demo, call us, email us, ask any questions. We're here to help and looking forward to hear from you. So next week, just before you hung up, next week we're going to be talking about, and this is a happy guy right there. So he definitely is happy because he's using RigER for his repairs and rework in the frac and flowback shop. So if you want to be as happy as he is, so please join us next week and find out how we can help you to manage your equipment repairs and maintenance with rework component for the frac and flowback next week. So next Thursday, same time, same place.
Yes, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
You bet. Thank you very much, guys.